So good morning, everyone. I'm welcoming you. My name is Efi Shoham. I teach medieval Jewish history at Ben Gurion University of the Negev in Beersheba, and I'm very proud and happy to open the morning session of the last day of this conference, this fabulous conference on Jewish craftspeople and craftsmanship in medieval Europe. Thank you to the two organizers of the conference, Andreas Lenartz and Maria Stutzberger, and to Simcha Goldin for hosting this, and the Center for the Research of Diaspora at Tel Aviv University. This is the 7th session, and we have some slight modifications in the session. We're going to be hosting 3 speakers in this session. 2 of the speakers are originally in the program. However, a 3rd speaker, we've altered the committee for this session has altered the speakers, and we are not going to have Nomi Feuchtwagen Sarig. She's going to be speaking in the next session. We are going to have Jeremy Alush is speaking in her stead, but all the other speakers are the same as on your program. This is the 7th session, and we focus on products for the Jewish community. Our first speaker, and I'll introduce both our speakers at the beginning so that this would be flawless, and I suggest that we'll take questions at the end of the 3 lectures that are planned. Our first speaker is Dr. Karin Sky, who is going to be speaking about a Jewish bakery in Erfurt. Karin has studied classical archaeology, ancient history, and archaeology of the Roman provinces in Freiburg, in Breisgau, and Hamburg. She received her PhD on the topic of waste disposal in the medieval city in 1993 in Freiburg. After receiving her doctorate, she was involved in a number of projects related to the excavations and the documentation of various cities in Germany. She was responsible for the medieval excavations in the cities of Leipzig and Bautzen, and the archaeological register of the cities of Eastern Saxony, as well as a member of the research staff on a project examining Slavic centers in Eastern Saxony at the Geistwissenschaftliches Zentrum Ostmitteleuropa in Leipzig. During the period between 1999 and 2020, she was a member of the scientific staff of the Thuringische Landsamt für Denkmalpflege und Archäologie. She coordinated the research on the medieval treasure trove of Erfurt, which is my personal favorite. And currently she's working as a World Heritage Coordinator for the city of Erfurt on the project Jewish Medieval Heritage in Erfurt. And she will be speaking to us about a Jewish bakery in Erfurt. The second speaker is Nachum Ben Yehuda, which I had the privilege of also listening to his fabulous lecture in Leeds 2 years ago when we actually met in person in Leeds. He will be speaking about Jewish tailors and related textile professionals in 13th and 14th century Spain from this perspective of contemporaneous rabbinical literature. Nachum Ben Yehuda is a textile historian and a textile craftsman, so he speaks from 2 vantage points about this on this fascinating topic. He specializes in the textiles and garments of the Hebrew Bible, Talmudic literature, and rabbinic sources. His doctoral dissertation is titled "The Flax Linen Industry and the Land in the Land of Israel Throughout the Ages," and he is currently the co-editor of the forthcoming book, Medieval Iberian Garments and Textiles in Their Multicultural Context. And his chapter in that volume deals with the topic of silk and medieval Iberian rabbinical literature. The third speaker will be Jeremy Alush, who was rescheduled from the first session of this conference, and his title will be Writing the History of Wage Labor in the Cairo Geniza, a completely different angle on the Middle Ages from a different geographic perspective. Jeremy Alush is a PhD candidate in Paris, and his dissertation, Going to Work in the Cairo Geniza, the Wage Earners and Their Condition in Fatimid and Ayyubite Egypt. And this dissertation is supervised by Judith Olshovi-Schlanger in Paris. So without further ado, I give you Karin, please.
Boker tov to everybody. Some of you were at my talk in Leeds in 2019 with a very similar title as today. But don't worry, I won't repeat myself. Some important things have changed since then. I was able to follow up on several tracks that not only expanded the name of the talk. The change design is, of course, related to my new job. The central theme is archaeology, but I will also look at written sources and pictorial representations. Sometimes it is worthwhile to take a fresh look at archaeological features that have been known for some time and to ask questions that were not asked during or shortly after an excavation. In the example presented here, I began to ask myself these questions after Michael Lemmerhard and Barbara Perlich had studied the written sources on Erfurt's Jewish quarter and gathered circumstantial evidence for the theories that emerged in the process. Their initial questions concerned the stone house, one of the objects with which Erfurt is applying for the UNESCO list. The archaeologists were only very marginally involved in the renovation work being carried out there, so I could hardly answer any of their questions. But only a few houses further on, the questions put me on a track that I have now been following for some time. You will see it in a moment that it is still only a chain of circumstantial evidence that I can present, but at least it is progressing. In view of the fact that bread is one of the main foodstuffs and Jewish regulations also require very special conditions in its production, at least for Passover, it is astonishing how little archaeology has been able to contribute to this topic so far. We know baking ovens from numerous pictorial representations. Here is an example from Pompeii, which also shows mills directly in front of the bakery. For the Middle Ages, I have compiled some examples from Christian manuscripts. The examples, starting from the 12th century, show basically the same type of single-chamber ovens. On the pictures of the Sachsenspiegel, here, you can also see...
Karine,
you didn't share your screen.
I didn't share my screen up,
No.
sorry.
No.
So I have to go back.
And okay, good.
Right? Oh Mann.
Just put it on presentation mode and we're good to go. Oh, we lost it. That's it.
Jetzt von Beginn an und
Fertig. Von Beginn an und dann müsste es da sein.
Does it work now?
Super,
Ja,
super.
perfekt.
Okay. So, do you remember what I told you? So I just go through the slides very quickly. This is the background for the new title. And I first showed you an image from Pompeii with the oven and the mills in front of the bakery. And this is the picture of Herrad of Landsberg, the Hortus Delictiarum, with an oven at the right-hand side, a very simple oven with one chamber. Of course, we have the several pictures in Christian Bibles. And here we have the Sachsenspiegel. I think that was the last thing I was talking about, yes. Where you have the oven on the left-hand side and the mill on the right.
Right.
Moving on, we get to the Nuremberg Foundation of Mendel and Landauer, where 1,200 pictures show professions in the Middle Ages. I just took some of the bakers that are presented there, and here you can see two different types of ovens. We have the one chamber oven, the second one in the row, and the fourth. And we also have two chamber ovens which show a technical progress, because it allowed a permanent baking. Not only, you couldn't only bake once, but you could bake again and again. So the production was much bigger. This next slide also shows a combination of professions, which seems logical to some extent. The brother depicted is a baker, then worked as a miller, and which is not logical at all, a house painter. That was his last profession. Another medium, but a similar depiction, a 13th century stained glass window from Bourges, shows also the one chamber oven. From Hebrew manuscripts, we are primarily helped by Haggadot, whose illustrations show different types of ovens. You all know this illustration from the program. The Spanish manuscript shows a slightly different, sophisticated form of an oven. I wished to walk around the corner to see what kind of oven it is, but the Spanish manuscript also shows the preparation of the matzot. Of course, the reason why you find so many oven illustrations in the Haggadot. This Italian manuscript also shows this oven shape, while the bird's head Haggadah again depicts the previous type of oven, possibly with a second chamber for the fire, but this does not seem certain. The next example does not really allow for reconstruction of the oven at all. And my last example, I'm just taking a short glance at all the pictures. There are many, many more. But my last example, I'm honestly not sure whether it is a baking oven or rather a heating oven in the interior. In any case, there is a chamber for the fire and maybe some kind of a chimney. But let's finally move on to the archaeological evidence for the bakery. Examples from Lübeck. Lübeck is certainly the best and longest researched city in Germany, and also has a very good written record. Thus, it was possible to draw a map with bakeries of the late 14th century. Significant is the location of the bakeries on the crossroads. The archaeological findings, on the other hand, are surprisingly few. The ovens are always located on the rear parts of the property. Over the centuries, the ovens were repeatedly renewed and remained in place. We have one example here from the 14th until the 18th century. The round type is the medieval type, and the other one at the bottom is from the 18th century. Another one shows just the same type, and it existed from 1301 until the 20th century. The last example is probably rather a private, it's a rather strange example with a very low dome for the as a chamber, and it is also rather young. Moving on to Wismar, also in the north of Germany, you can see a rather small one and maybe also a private oven. The difference is that it is inside a building. Next one also in the north, Rostock. Only few remained, but you can see that it must have had a round oven chamber as well. Moving on to the south of Germany, to Regensburg. I'm grateful for Iris Niesen gave me her PhD thesis, which will be published soon, but it's not published yet. We are going to an outside the Roman fort, directly on the Danube. An area was investigated with a conspicuous number of fire remains and oven remains. Immediately after the excavation, a masonry construction was initially identified as a gallows foundation. However, it is certainly also a baking oven, even with the small remains of the dome, with the continuity already shown for the other towns. We have it here as a drawing. A little further south, an example from around 1100 from Switzerland, probably only used for a short time and a rather modest installation on a farmstead. Moving on to Thuringia, this is an example from a Thuringian castle with a very large baking oven from the time of the construction. You have it here. Considerably reduced during the use of the castle. The last example is also from a castle, but from Israel, which can be dated very precisely as its destruction by Saladin has been handed down. For this reconstruction, I have to thank my longtime friend Lisa, who has worked it out. This is also not published yet. Let's now go to Erfurt. I started with the younger sources since they are recorded in a database and list localizable bakers. The staff of the city archive used the lockdown to start with a database for the text lists, the earlier text lists, starting at the end of the 13th century. This work is not finished, and I'm very grateful that Antje Bauer provided me with information for this lecture. So only recently was I able to assign some of the older bakeries. As a result, one now sees the same phenomenon as with the northern German examples, documenting the same locations of the bakeries over centuries. There will certainly be more sites in the future. The work with the text list is not finished yet. This slide shows the frequent combinations of mill and bakeries. It can be seen that many of the mills are linked to watercourses, which is not difficult in Erfurt. In addition to the individual river branches, we have archaeological evidence for water regulation around 1100, and there was an artificially constructed commercial stream in the 12th century, which was also used for this purpose. It can no longer be seen on the modern maps because it is vanished today, but here we have the medieval city wall, and it went just behind the city wall. I will just give you one example of an excavated mill. It is important because, again, we have archaeological evidence which is much older than the written sources. We have it here. The first dates go back to the end of the 11th century. Rather scarce evidence, but that is how we find watermills in archaeological material. Right. Written sources for this bakery go back to 1294. This is one of the examples that were seen on the map. The archaeological findings, however, are very, I would say, very small for a professional bakery. This is the example that I've just shown. When we're moving on to the other side of the river, there was an archaeological find that has not yet been documented in the sources, but it is also older again than the documents available. You can see that although it dates in Romanesque times, which is visible from the building technique and also from the findings, it can't be younger than the middle of the 13th century. But even though it is so old, it is not very far below the modern surface, which you can see here on the picture. So there might have been younger ovens at the same place, which were destroyed by the young buildings from the 19th century. After a long way, let's finally move on to our third oven. We are now right next to the Kremerbrücke, the Merchants Bridge, in the Jewish quarters, because it's the two Jewish quarters, the first and the second. Again, we find the continuity of mill sites on both sides of the bridge. The oldest record is from 1248. The mills and the footbridge, which you can see here, and also here on the historical photograph, they existed until 1895, when the new bridge, the Rathausbrücke, was built. Another one with the mills on both sides of the river, here and here. And now the new bridge. And we have the plan from 1857, where you can still see the mill here. And we have the footbridge here. Oops. And the Merchants Bridge up here. In 2007, a new building was, the 1857 plan still shows the mill, a part of which was uncovered during the work for the new bridge and the mill yard. You can see it here. In 2007, a new building was erected on the other side of the road. Again, we have here we have the building. Here we have the footpath, and you have to imagine here the Merchants Bridge. Here you have the Rathausbrücke. So we're looking here at the front of this building here. And before the house was built, there was an archaeological excavation beforehand, as usually. Unfortunately, the house that we can see on the picture had a cellar which destroyed much of the archaeological substance. But behind, you can even see it here, at the beginning of the excavations, we were more lucky. Here is the footpath that was still visible in the 19th century. Now we're getting closer to the oven, and here now it is excavated. It's a huge round masonry which existed between 12th and first half of the 13th century. The internal construction is unfortunately unclear, perhaps a substructure for the very large fire chamber. It is also important to note that further layers of bricked clay and charcoal were visible under the masonry, which means that there might have been older ovens here as well. Younger ones have not survived. They were removed when the site was built over. You can see that here again, the stratigraphy is rather thin. But why am I asking the question about the Jewish bakery? First of all, the drawing of the building. The Judenbuch, of which a new edition was published in 2019, records Simon of Cologne owning 2 houses opposite the bakery in 1407. This is the old edition, which shows Simon of Cologne. When we take a look at the new edition, the evidence is a bit different because which Süßmann has published has been wiped out, and the actual entrance is a bit different because Simon of Cologne had 2 houses and even his wife is mentioned. On the other hand, we don't have Jewish bakers in the Judenbuch, which is a bit strange. I'm only briefly showing the history of ownership here as it is currently assumed by Barbara Perlich. You can see here the Jewish quarter at the end of the 13th century, and here we have the part of the city which I have been showing in the excavation. Here we have the mill, here we have the bakery, but at the time, at the end of the 13th century, this is obviously in Christian ownership. A bit bigger to make it clear. This changes again. We have only the mill mentioned and a bakery, but we don't know anything about the owners for the second Jewish community. And then again, when the first, the second community was founded, we have the very small nucleus of the Jewish community here with the synagogue and new houses, and all this part is in Christian hands. What we don't know yet is what happened later on. We are still waiting for the map for 1407, which should make it clear how the ownership was at that time. But let's go back to the archaeological evidence. If you compare a large oven with the other archaeological examples, you can see that Erfurt has the biggest medieval oven excavated so far. It is certainly no coincidence it is next to a mill. Hand mills, as Michael has shown yesterday, would not have provided enough flour. An oven like this would have easily provided the whole community with bread, not only with matzot, and all the families would have kept their food warm for Shabbat. But as I cannot prove it, I conclude by changing the entrance slide again. A professional Jewish bakery in Erfurt, that's what remains. I thank you for your attention and look forward to further work. I am quite aware that Hebrew sources have to be consulted for halachic questions as well, something I'm not capable of. Luckily, Andreas Lennartz asked me to work together, so the interdisciplinary work will be done by different specialists and hopefully come to a better end. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin. Thank you very much for an engaging lecture and for all this host of finds that you've shown us. We're moving to Nachum's lecture, and we'll take the questions and we'll field the questions later on as we conclude the session. So our next speaker is Nachum Ben Yehuda, and his title will be Jewish Tailors and Related Textile Professionals in 13th and 14th Century Spain, from the perspective of contemporaneous halachic literature. So Nachum, please, and share your screen before you start.
Boker tov.
Boker tov.
Bon dia. Bom dia. Buenos dias. Good morning. This is slide number 1. Slide number 2. I always like to add this warning. I'm not going to read it out. Everybody knows Ivan Radman. Why do I do this every time? Because I've heard so many unjustified and wild extrapolations going around. We have to be a little bit careful that we don't have the entire picture. Okay, slide number 3. Here are some of the terminologies in the background. You can see that sastre and sastra are imported from Catalan. They're imported also from, essentially from Latin. That is a tailor, of course. The earlier term in use in Iberia is alfayate, or his wife, alfayata. This is a Hispanic Arabic word, earlier coming from classical Arabic, and it's also the exact same word in Hebrew with a little bit of difference in the first consonant. Okay, these are interchangeable terminologies. They are tailors. Costurera, or costurero, which is less common, the male, it would be a seamster in English, which is not generally used. Just a seamster, not a tailor. And of course, the seamstress, which everybody knows, they sew up the material which has been measured out, cut up, and given to them. Later on, we will meet 2 levels of sastre or alfayate, maestro artesano, and less than that, lower than, is official artesano, and of course the apprentice, which can work with either one of these. What else did I want to say? Take a particular mention and notice of the metathesis here from the original SRT, and STR, that's metathesis, and the S, which has been inserted here, is a buffer consonant. Here, the consonant shift from het, the Arabic and Hebrew het, to the Spanish F. That's for the linguistic conference. Next slide. I couldn't resist presenting some data from our dear colleague Merche, or Sis Urithelki. She's got a chapter in our book, which you have to buy. And this is the information regarding the trousseau of Carlos III in Navarra. What a trousseau and what a cadre of artisans they've got working there. What interested me, of course, was the Jewish, you can see the identity, right? I have to close the windows here. How do I close this stuff? Okay, you can see the religion. There are a large number of Jewish costureros, sometimes costurera, female, and I noticed that 2 of these gentlemen have a family name which is Kayat, okay? Now, if I check this out, we just heard of al-fayate, which comes from hayat in Arabic. This is a group of occupational surnames used in Iberia, apparently by Jews, with all kinds of different variants. So hayat and kayat and al-fayate, they're all tailors. Either he himself or they themselves are tailors, or his father or his grandfather. Just like a man named Schneider may not be a tailor, but his grandfather might well have been. Next slide is slide number 6. Okay, no, I'm not supposed to do that. Okay, I'm supposed to do this. Okay, This is my cheat sheet on the other screen. Okay, these five men are the co-stars in this presentation. They are some of the most prominent Jewish rabbinic figures in Iberia in the 12th to 14th centuries. Okay, the green arrow indicates a teacher and his disciple, Moshe ben Nachman, or Bonastruk Saporta, or Nachmanides, and his disciple is Shlomo ben Adret. His acronym is Rashba in Barcelona, and his subsequent disciple is Yom Tov ben Avraham Aseveli. You can see where they lived and what time it was. The blue arrow indicates a good friend, because Asher ben Yechiel had to flee Germany, Cologne, through Provence, and he arrived in Barcelona. At that time, he met, according to legend, Shlomo ben Adret, who said, the rabbinical position in Toledo is open, and I advise you to take it, which he did. That is slide number 6. Okay, back to here. Slide number 7. We're going to start out with Nachmanides from Girona. This is from his commentary to the Torah. Interestingly enough, all of the Jewish communities in the world are reading from the 5 portions of Exodus which describe the tabernacle, and we're right in the middle. The third one out of 5 is coming Shabbat. Okay, after the Torah presents lengthy descriptions of all the structures, utensils, and vestments used in the tabernacle, they are actually made and assembled. Then comes, towards the end, this surprising and problematic verse. They hammered out the sheets of gold and cut strands. This is the only instance, this is what Ramban says, in which the manufacturing technique used in the tabernacle is detailed and described. Why? Okay, so Nachmanides replies to his own question, because the craftsmen that did this were amazed, because this was a previously unfamiliar method of plying, first of all, hammering and cutting, and plying gold strands into one plied yarn with different colors of dyed wool and flax. Okay, now he does not mention this, but I'm willing to bet you that he went to see in Girona a batador de oro, a gold beater, whether he is Jewish or not, it doesn't matter, to see exactly how this is done and how he would describe that the craftsmen in the tabernacle were actually amazed. Slide number 8. Okay, we're going to responsa. These are rabbinical replies to questions that have been asked, and they are going to give a decision or advice on how to behave. Okay, responsa is plural, responsum is singular. Okay, Shlomo ben Adret, he's the earliest one we have. This is in Barcelona. Okay, the story is as follows. Incidentally, each responsum has a lengthy and complex rabbinic discourse. I am going to omit that today because it is integral to the halachic decision, but it is irrelevant to our current goal, which is the assessment of material culture aspects. Okay, a frequent topic which comes up in rabbinical responsa is they deal with all facets of religious life, but a frequent topic is monetary disputes. In brief, he says, you owe me money, and he says, no, I do not owe you money. Okay, so what happened here? Reuben, these are generally used pseudonyms, Reuben and Simeon. Okay, Reuben but it actually happened, is a Jewish tailor. He has a loyal Gentile customer. Okay, this is in Barcelona, maybe, or in the area. This customer never goes to another tailor. Okay, the going price for this tailor's work is 2 dinars per garment. All of a sudden, appears on the scene a man named Simeon, and he is competing with Reuben for the Gentiles' work, and offering a discount price, not 2 dinars per garment, 1 dinar. Okay. Reuben complains to Shlomo ben Adret that Simeon is unfairly competing. He is either causing him direct damage, which is called a tortfeasor, or indirect damage. The Talmudic analogy is grabbing the pauper's only cake. This is from the ovens mentioned in the last presentation, of course, straight from the coals. He's got only one cake. Grabbing his only cake is considered evil. Okay. Reuven assumes that Simeon will obey the rabbi's decision to cease and desist with the unfair competition. The decision: the Gentile may do as he pleases. He can go to any tailor he desires. But on the other hand, Simeon could probably be castigated for tempting him to damage Reuven's livelihood. What's our takeaway? 2 Jewish tailors are competing for the patronage of a Gentile client. Question: why and when does a Gentile choose a Jewish tailor? Answer: a good question. Number 9. Okay, this responsum is just wonderful. There are no monetary arguments involved, nor tailors directly, but it deals with the laws of Shabbat. Ben Adret accurately describes a lady's garment. It may have belonged to his wife or his sister or his daughter. There are halachic prohibitions for sewing and tying knots on Shabbat. An additional layer of rabbinical decree prohibits doing that which only resembles the original prohibition. So the question is lacing up this garment on Shabbat, probably in the morning, does it resemble, it's not really sewing, but does it resemble sewing? And perhaps it will be prohibited to do, God forbid, on Shabbat. There is an additional factor used by decisors in specific contexts, not always, and it's called go out and see what the people practice. It means that people who observe halacha regularly do not perform forbidden acts, okay? Apparently, he is sure that the women in Barcelona, many of them wear this type of dress on Shabbat, and they lace it up. Okay, our takeaway is, it seems that this garment is commonplace in Barcelona, at least in Barcelona, on Shabbat. This is it, ladies and gentlemen, saya encordada. Very regal, and thus appropriate for Shabbat, the day when all women, they're queens every day, but especially on Shabbat. And note the loops and the cords, which may have been similar to sewing, but in the decision they are not. Okay, now, next slide is number 11. Here it is. These are reenactments or reconstructions of saya encordada. If you want to be in step, better open your PayPal accounts right now and get one. You can get them in any color you want as long as it's blue. Slide number 12. Okay, we're going to a Ben Adret disciple. He's in Zaragoza. His name is Yom Tov Ben Avraham Ashbili. And we're back to, unfortunately, that's the way life is, monetary and marital disputes. Okay, we have a family, Familia de Alfayates. We don't know their family name. Maybe it is really Kayat or Alfayate. Okay, they are a family, a father, mother, and 5 sons. 3 of the sons die. The widow of one of them sends her father to demand payment for the marriage contract, which she deserves. And he claims that one of the family's houses is collateral for that marriage contract. There are two brothers left, and they reject the demand. They assert that it is falsified, but Yom Tov ben Asavili decides in favor of the widow, and the house is actually collateral for payment of her marriage contract. Okay, what is our takeaway today? Jacob, in this case, and his 5 sons are partners in the tailoring business. And the question, how many other tailoring families like that were there? And you already know the answer. It's a good question. Number 13. We're going towards the end. It's too fast, okay? Now, we mentioned that Asher ben Yechiel had to flee Germany, Cologne, for obvious reasons. He came to Barcelona. The recommendation was accept the rabbinical position in Toledo. We're now in Castile in the west, and he later was considered the central rabbinic figure in all of Castile. Okay, once again, a dispute. It's both monetary and marital. Okay, he's not. If I say that Reuben is a poor tailor, it doesn't mean that he's not a good tailor. He's a good tailor, but he's a poor man. In Castilian, we say nebech. Okay, he's a tailor. He's poor, and he has many debts. Appears Simeon. Somebody is not muted. Okay, and Simeon offers this man 30 doblas, their gold coins, in advance in order to be his apprentice and learn the trade of tailoring. Now let's figure this out. Each dobla is it weighs 4.6 grams of gold. Times 30 doblas, we've got 140 grams, or if you prefer, 5 ounces of gold. What does that mean in Castile, in Toledo at that time? Now we go back to 2 levels of tailor, or this is probably alfayete. If he is a master artisan, that amount of gold equals a full year's salary, 360 working days. If he's Jewish, he works less than 360 days a year, of course. But this is an annual salary in your hand right now. Now, if he is not a master artisan, he's only an official artisan, that amount of gold is worth 2 full years of wage. Let me ask you a question. Would you take it or not? He's got debts. Well, the additional condition in the agreement is that to be reimbursed for this down payment, the future earnings of the tailor shop, with working there both Reuben and Simeon, I assume, that all of the future earnings for the next 5 years will be divided equally. Well, Reuben says, mañana es mañana. I'll take the money and we'll start. And he also takes an oath to verify the agreement. In comes esposa, Reuven's wife. He hears about this and she is absolutely furious. She says to her husband, or to Asher ben Yechiel, how do you expect me to support myself and the children when he divides up all of the future earnings for 5 years, 50-50? So she has demands. Either you obligate yourself to provide child support for those 5 years, or you will be forced to divorce me. Okay, we're all tense now. What is Asher ben Yechiel's decision? Okay, the oath that Reuben took is valid. He must implement it, and his wife is going to have to live with 50% of the earnings for the next 5 years. Okay. Our takeaway for today. There is one poor, come on. There's one tailor in Toledo, who is poor. We know one. He has large debts. Apparently, it's customary to become an apprentice to learn the craft of tailoring. And this manner of paying tuition by lending money to the teacher and being reimbursed over several years might have been customary. I'm saying might and maybe as many times as possible. And we have a question, are all Jewish tailors poor? Next slide. Okay, this is one more responsum from Asher ben Yechiel, a monetary dispute. Here we go. But now we find this meeting, as we found earlier in Barcelona, there is a Gentile client of a Jewish tailor. If you dispatch an agent to find yourself a tailor, that means you're pretty well off, okay? Now, the agent of the Gentile seeks a tailor. He finds a Jewish tailor. He was not specifically looking for this one, but he found them. He is probably the best one, the best man around, okay? The tailor, the agent furnishes cloth to the Jewish tailor. Now, we don't see the original Gentile coming in to get measurements. I don't know why. Maybe it's just omitted because it's not important, but I have to go get measured to get my new bar mitzvah suit, okay? Now, while tailor number one is cutting the cloth, in comes tailor number two in the same workshop, okay? The agent who gave the previous tailor the cloth now gives other cloth, more cloth, to tailor number two so that he will cut and make. Everything sounds okay. The work is done. Both tailors have finished the work. The agent comes to pick it up, take away, okay? Now, either the Gentile himself or his agent pays the tailor's wage according to two master tailors or two artisans' fee. Then the Gentile or his agent takes the clothing home and he's no longer part of our story. Now what happens? Tailor number two turns out to be just an apprentice. He is paid by his boss only apprentice wage, which is less than a master's wage. In turn, the apprentice demands to receive full payment, just like the master himself, since the cloth that he received was given directly to him by the agent of the Gentile. And he says, and I did the work all by myself. In parentheses, this is real chutzpah, as we say in Toledo. So what's the decision? It's a long discourse. Asher ben Yechiel decides as follows. Since the agent and or the Gentile chose to give cloth to each of those tailors in the same workshop, this was direct and individual. That is another halachic rule or principle calling giving importance. When he gives over the cloth to the man who we now know is the apprentice, that's called giving him importance. Okay? And therefore, he should receive a wage equal to the master. I'm sure the master was not very happy about this, but he probably did it. Okay, our takeaway, okay? In Toledo, in Castile, a Gentile's agent locates a Jewish tailor, maybe by chance or maybe intentionally, we do not know. Master tailors employ apprentices. Sometimes the apprentice works on a project by himself, but in the master's shop, and he does it just as well as the master. No more questions, and this is the end. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Nachum. Thank you very much for an engaging presentation. I'm taking questions in the chat, and I'll kind of collect them for the Q&A session that will follow the last lecture. Our last lecture will be from Jeremy Alush. Jeremy will be talking about writing the history of wage laborers in the Cairo Geniza. So Jeremy, you're more than welcome to share your screen, open your mic, and we're all in. Yes.
So we are fine. So Thank you once again to the organization. I'm really glad to be finally able to talk to you about some elements from my research. And so thank you for your comprehension and to have invited me. So we'll be talking about glass making in Cairo, Geniza. And I really like to begin my intervention usually with this quote from the famous French historian Jacques Le Goff, with this rather provocative statement. Are you seeing the images from Zoom or no?
Yeah. We're all good.
But you can see the whole screen. Okay, so this is the most important thing. So what he's really intending here, we may assume, is that it's not really a bad topic for the Middle Ages, but rather a challenging subject. It's also a way to say that from the 21st century on, the question of craftsmanship, of work, of labor is a rather dynamic topic in the research on the Western space. But it's also a great opportunity to discover many aspects of the life of that time in the Near Orient. And we will be talking about the Cairo Geniza. I won't be long, but I think it's always useful to give some introductive elements. So the aggregate of manuscripts found in this Cairo Geniza, as we call it today, reached the attention of scholars at the end of the 19th century, and they were, of course, discovered in the Ben Ezra synagogue of Fustat. This is a collection of thousands of documents written in various languages, mainly Hebrew and Arabic, but also Aramaic. It contains various types of documents, including private letters, secular literature, legal deeds, Bible manuscripts, and it's, of course, among others. But from the details they provide, the documents related to labor constitute a unique window on the daily life of the individual they mention. Also, the economical foundation of that time, we found references to employment, to trades, wages, casual and regular laborers, their social status, as well as mention of poverty and precariousness. Cross-checking the dissimulated data provides us a small but rather reliable basis of indication regarding essential features of the social life and economy of that time. And in this guideline, we are greatly indebted, of course, to the undertakings of Shlomo Goiten, Eliyahu Ashtor, and Moshe Gil, to name only the greatest. So we will be talking here about glass making, and in this intervention, my main aim is to show you how we can respond or think about very basic questions, and on what type of document can we rely on. And we will see if we have good answers or not, or if there are some questions that remains to be answered, etc., etc. So some of those questions, as glass is one of the 250 crafts that are mentioned in the Cairo Geniza. According to Shlomo Goiten, glass is one of the favorite trades, the trades favored by a Jewish community. Two main arguments that he mentions. The first is that the glass making is a very old craft attested from the antiquity in the Near East, in the Palestine, and also that it should be a very rough and tough work under very high temperatures. So this is how would I say it? It would be understandable for a Jewish to choose such a trade that other people would not like to practice. So some of questions that may come naturally to our mind. What can design the term assageage? Are we talking about the craftsman itself, a salesman, a businessman, a capitalist? What is his social position, etc., etc. So to do so, we will think in the first place to bilateral contracts of employment. We find some of these documents in the Kerogenisa. I don't know if you can see my pointer. So this is, we don't know exactly what the craft is involved here, but this is a very specific document. You can see that it is a minute, like Machberet. It's like a sheet of paper where the scribe of the Beit Din was writing the main features of the cases that took place before him. This is a contract with the very famous scribe Shmuel ben Yaakov, who was responsible a few years ago of what we call today the Codex of Leningrad. We can find here a very clean example of employment agreement in the glass activity. This one also, we will see that they share a very special link between them. This is also a contract about for a software, but this time he's employed with a wage, a regular wage on a regular basis, whereas here Shmuel ben Yaakov received a global sum for an order. We have here a contract for a more, for a private teacher of Kodesh. And here we have an apprenticeship, for example, for a young boy that will learn a craft at the workshop of a tailor. What is an employment agreement? So you can see here the main features of those type of contract, what we need to keep in mind when we are finding some of those manuscripts. I have also to mention that I showed you here several documents, but I don't know yet if there are maybe others to be founded. So, for example, some of them are already described by Goldstein, but some other may be close to the specific typology of documents. So you can see here what we need to know in a legal manner about those type of documents, their main features. And I wanted also to show you here, it's really an average idea of, we'll be talking, of course, about money, and I wanted you to know, to have a rough idea of what is it corresponding to. So we can see that the value of the dinar is really stable along the centuries. So of course we are talking about the core era of the Kerogenisa from the 11th century to the early 13th century, and along all this time, those centuries, the value of the dinar is rather stable, whereas the value of the silver coins, the dirham, can vary. I would say there are times that we can see it go down, it comes up, it's rather unstable. But to give you a rough idea, with 36 to 40 dirhams, you get a gold coin of 425 grams of almost pure gold alloy. We will see also that there are some typology. We can talk about a typology of workers. And here we are indebted to the work of Eliyahu Ashto, of course. And we can see that there is a low middle class that will earn an average of 4 to 5 dinars a month, whereas the really the base of the wage laborers, the unskilled work, will earn only 1.5 to 2.5 dinars a month. And to give you also a very raw idea, 2 dinars can sustain a poor family in, for example, Fustat for a month. That gives you a very basic idea of the sums that we will talk about later on. So this is the first manuscript I would like to talk to you. It is very interesting because it's a really clean example that what an employment contract features. So here we have 2 partners that are engaging a craftsman, a glazier that will work on the kiln for a duration of 1 year, a complete year, and we get his wage. We get a specific clause of exclusivity. We'll maybe talk to a bit later on some other details, but what we need to search in those type of documents, of course, the first term is zajaj, which can refer to the material itself or the craftsman. Also, we will really make a big focus on the root ajara, aleph gimel resh, which is referring to the specifically, it's not like amal, ain mem lamed, which provides us with a raw, generic idea of work. Here, this particular root ajara is really referring to wage labor, salaried work. And also we can search, we can track another specific term, sanir, which is referring to skilled worker, skilled craftsman with a specific knowledge. We will see that it is also important regarding to the status and the remuneration of those workers. Here, I made you a division of how the document is constructed. Sadly, the top corner on the left is torn, but we can see nonetheless the construction, which is specific to those kind of documents. And in yellow, if I don't know if you can see well, here this is a mention of correction. So we've got the word sana and jamia that are corrected, and we only see here the term sana that has been included here between the line, and we can assume that the word jamia was somewhere here. And I add there here you got a very basic translation that I made, a free translation of that document. So you can see that we have the names of the partners, the name of the employee, the year. So we are in, you can see the date, excuse me. The date is 1057. We have the performation, of course, of the Kenyan, which is also an important feature of that type of document. We can find them in the others document too. And here is another document, another contract for an employee, but you can see that the date is the same. And actually, it's a very specific case in the Kerogenisa. It is actually the same contract, just it is another version. Here you can see that there are no signatures at the end, and we may assume that on this one, maybe, we don't see well, but it is possible that we get a signature. But this is the exact same contract, but the formulation is sometimes a bit different. The localization of the Kenyan, for example, the datation, but we get others information. The construction here you can see is the same. And this is the translation, also a very raw translation, but you can see that the information are really the same. What we find here very interesting is that the employee will work on the kiln, the furnace. So you can see it here, and I have linked it to you another document. Excuse me, why is it making that? I don't know. That here in this recipe for alchemy, for the preparation of metals, you can see the exact same term here. I don't know if you can see the letters, kuf vavresh, and the term zajaj. Here, fi in Arabic, so be, in. And here we have the word sanir, which is, as we said a few minutes ago, the term for a skilled worker. And the main attribute of that type of worker is that he will earn an average of 5 dirhams a day. And this is another dirham for his lunch. This is an additional sum. It is very, we can see that type of addition for a lunch in various type of documents. And this is the wage that is earning, for example, many other skilled workers as a mason, a carpenter, a plasterer, and many other workers. And we can find those references in the works of Eliyahu Ashtor, not only the Cairo Geniza, but also elsewhere in the Near East. We said that in that document there is a clause of exclusivity, and we may assume that the specific clause is related to concurrence. So we may assume that there was many workshops, and that the workforce, the craftsman, is very important and have a specific value. In this particular document from the 11th century, we can read that the agent of a great merchant localized in Fustat, who is at that precise moment when he wrote that letter, he was in the Upper Egypt working on the harvest of flax, and he tells to his master that he lost his employees because another businessman offered more money. So we can see that the question of concurrence is to be found elsewhere in the Cairo Geniza documents. In this precise document, we get a document from the Beit Din of Tyre in Lebanon, where a merchant is appointing a representative of his interest in Fustat, and he mentions a very large exportation of glass to Egypt. So we can see that this is a good that can be exported also. Here we got another document, which is also a legal deed for a it is a partnership, the foundation of a partnership, where where there is a main investor, like in other documents, and there are 200 dinars are invested, and the first half is invested to buy red glass from Beirut, from Lebanon, and another half, another 50%, to buy glass locally produced in Egypt. So we can see that you can also import some glass to make some transformation. We can also see that we have another type of document. So here it's not about employing someone, it's rather about making a foundation, creating a factory itself with money invested, a capital that is invested. In this other this is also a document that is founding a glass factory, and this here we have another particularity, another detail. And there is a first partner that gives a loan of 10 dinar to his associate, and the two of them will work, but the one that is loaning money will work only 2 days a week, and the other will work during the 5 other days. Of course, we are not working at Shabbat. This is a contract for 6 months, so we can think that this agreement, this deed, is made to permit to the second associate who is taking the loan to pay back his creditor. In this document are also mentioned the functionment fees of the workshop, including the wage for a laborer. And I think that here we can find the term that is very interesting. So the term ujra, if you can. As we said, this is the famous route that we are tracking in all those type of documents. The creditor here, his name is Netanel Abu Sahl, and he is the same person that we will find in this particular document, which is also, oh, excuse me, it's great. Excuse me. This is another document which is very interesting. So here we're not talking about glass making, but rather wine making. And this is a huge foundation with the huge capital of 1,500 dinar, which is a very enormous sum for that time. And we have the very same businessman that we had in the previous document, which is a glassmaker. He also referred to as a glassmaker, and he will invest 400 dinar just for his share. So we can see that here the term al-zajjaj is not referring to a simple laborer, a simple craftsman, but also a capitalist, a businessman, which should be a very powerful man. In this other document, we can find, this is also a legal deed, but we find the mention of employment for the molding of glass. I don't know if you can read this easily. So we have here the terms sabika, which in Arabic means molding of molding. It's a basic idea of that term for glass. Here, this is what we see. So we saw that we can use contracts of employment, but they are pretty rare. We can also refer to private letters. We found also information in a recipe. So we can, like that, take various type of documents to cross-check the data they provide. And I wanted also to show you this document. This is outside the Geniza itself, but it is rather a responsa from the Rambam. And here you get the original text in Judeo-Arabic, and here the translation in Hebrew. And what is very interesting in that responsa is that we find, as you can see here, that we have a factory which is shared between Jews and Goyim. Here we are talking, of course, about Muslims. And they are sharing their activities between glass making and goldsmith. Also, a bit further on, the question basically is what should they do about the income of the objects made on the Shabbat, where, of course, this is just the Muslim workers that are present in the factory. This is their question. Should we share it? Should it really only for the Muslim guys or not? And here we've got the response is pretty interesting. The income on for the day of Shabbat will go to the Muslim guys, and the income for the Friday, which is the equivalent, he said Yom Zulato, will go to the Jewish only. And also another response for the tools used in the factory, and the Rambam says that there are no, this is not a problem that the Muslim Muslims use the tools, the shared tools during the Shabbat. This is not a problem. So we can see here that a factory can be shared between Jewish and Muslims, and also between different craftsmen, different activities. So do we have answer to our questions? We saw that the term azajaj can refer to the craftsman in so, but also to a bigger trader, a bigger merchant, a powerful merchant. But we can see also that most of the time, it seems that when we are talking about azajaj, the person is able to work in such a factory. So it's always more or less related to work itself. We saw also that the social position is not, it can vary, but that a laborer in the sector in the activity of glass is always a skilled worker, is not from the really base, he is not an unskilled worker. He earns an average of, his remuneration is corresponding to a certain middle class in that type of, in that time. We had some details on the work. So we saw that, of course, there is the question of the furnace, the kiln, but we also, of course, saw with the response of the Rambam that he can share this furnace, but there are maybe other details to be founded. We saw at least one workshop where we have two partners and an employee, and it seems to be also the case in the contracts of partnership that we saw a bit later. We did not know, we didn't see anything about the raw material itself. Maybe it is to be founded elsewhere in other documents. And we also saw that the glass can be exported, it can be imported, that some artisans can work with local glass, locally produced and also imported. We talked about red glass. What is it exactly? It's complicated to define, but we may assume that it could be in order to produce a specific object with maybe some color, some decoration. And about the kind of items that are produced, there are also, we can find some other information, but this is, it's really disseminated in many letters, private letters. We can see what kind of items. For example, we can see that in one of the documents mentioned by Moshe Gil, we can see that a window is bought for a reparation in the synagogue. But it's complicated to see if a craftsman is designed to create a specific item. That kind of information is not really clear right now, but it is to be, of course, continued. So I thank you for your attention, and I hope that it was clear enough. I'm really sorry for some of the problems that I encountered for this presentation. Thank you very much, and you can see here the collection and the person that helped me to prepare this communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. If you can stop sharing the screen, and we'll open up questions momentarily. I will first relay the questions that we received through the chat to our various speakers, and we'll start according to the order of presentation. So we'll start with the questions to Karin, and then to Nachum, and finally to Jeremy. So I'll start. The first question that I received for Karin is from Jofi Buddha. Are all the oven remains that you've shown us in the slides from Germany, from all over Germany?
Wait, Effie, I can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me
Thank you.
now?
Yes.
The first question is from Jofi Buddha, and she asks whether the remains that you showed us from all over Germany, were they all of ovens and bakeries belonging to Jews?
They had nothing to do with Jews, actually.
Okay.
In contrast to the pictures, I showed you all but one examples from the archaeological evidence. There are just very, very few archaeological hints for bakeries. There's just one from Freiburg that I didn't show you. But for Lübeck, for example, they are all Christian bakeries.
Right, right. That was my impression as well. A question from Nomi Sarig. How large was the population in Erfurt in the relevant period, and why was there need for so many active bakeries at the same time? Were they publicly or privately owned, or whom did they serve?
Wait. Many questions at one time.
Yeah.
Well, the many bakeries, for me, it looks like that people simply bought their bread. They didn't bake at home. If you have a bakery at every corner in the city, you wouldn't take the effort to use your own oven. And this is also true for the Jewish population, of course. It's a bit strange that inside the Jewish quarter, we except for this one oven, we don't find any hints from the written sources for other ovens, even for the Christian population. And was that all?
Can you say something about the size of the population, just so that we will get?
It's more a question for the historians
okay.
from Erfurt. It's always difficult to calculate. I think
I see.
Michael Emmerhead would be the right person to answer this question. I hope she's with us. Michael, can you answer?
It's all right. You've already answered my question in that you said that they were actually
can you hear me now?
Small establishments. It's all right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Now, Micah, can yeah.
We don't know exactly how many persons belong to the Jewish community, but we have around 35 to more than 50 households.
Okay.
And
out of a total
can be one person,
out of a total population of what?
Or a family.
And that is out of a total population of, can you give an estimate at least? Just that we would, so many bakeries for how many people? Okay. Another question to Karin from Stephanie Fuchs. Is the fact that there is no baker mentioned in the Bistrina Judaorum a hint that it might be a public bakery like a Chulent oven or Matzenbäckerei mentioned in some of the later sources? And did you stumble over any source giving evidence if there is a difference between ovens for matzot and other ovens? And if that evidence is there, what would it be?
Difficult questions.
Indeed.
I wish I could answer them. As a matter of fact, we have only one oven at the site. That's one thing. And even compared with the other ovens in Erfurt, it's the biggest one. So maybe it was multifunctional. That should be the first one. And no, I didn't find any hints for different ovens for the different purpose. I showed you some of the illuminations, and of course it's always difficult to interpret I think from the ovens of the matzot, you can see that it is just a picture. It's not a, you can't construct an oven by that picture. So it's difficult to differentiate.
Well, we know that we know from the halachic sources that the ovens that were used for regular baking were actually cleansed and prepared for the use in Pesach, at least in some of the cases. So it may lend to reason to say that these were the same ovens that were used after a process of cleansing. So that at least is what I know from the halachic sources. There's a comment from Tanya about Cologne. The Cologne Schreinsbuch mentions several bakeries, but only the one in the synagogue yard in the Schulhof has the addition Judaorum. Although the others are mentioned as bakers or baking houses and that belong or are in Jewish ownership. She thinks this implies or implicates that the Bistrina Judaorum is a public or communal bakery. Is this the case in Erfurt?
Yeah, certainly. Yes.
Okay. Another question by Susan Weidengarten. Is there any archaeological or written evidence to show where the Jews would have baked for their Shabbos chalot at home or taken the dough to the bakery? Is there any evidence that you came up with or others that indicate to that effect?
I don't know of any, but maybe the historians could help us.
Yeah.
Anybody an idea?
We're fielding that to the. Good question. If no, then or if we don't have an answer and we're left with a question, then I'm fielding another question from Esperanza. She mentions the fact that in Catalonia, some seals were found to mark bread and to differentiate between bread produced for Christians and bread produced for Jews. Did you find any archaeological findings to that effect?
Unfortunately,
that
no.
Kind of demarcation?
Unfortunately, no. But would be grateful to get the evidence from Spain, from Catalonia.
Okay, so definitely. So Esperanza, you've been challenged in this respect. And now a question that I got for Nahum from Joanna. Joanna says she's been studying tailors in medieval Portugal, and many of them were Jews. In fact, they seem to be the most skilled tailors, and the Portuguese kings hired Jewish tailors for the court. Why were the Jews so prominent in this particular trade, and why was their work so appreciated? Nahum, that's a question for you.
Yes, I also told Joanna that's a good question, and it needs to be worked on. The Jews were moneylenders, that's the famous question, because they couldn't buy land. But why would they be tailors? And the best tailors, we have to work on this. So next year, Bezrat Hashem.
Okay, and another question for you from Nomi. Hold on. No, this is for Jeremy. A question for Jeremy. Two questions for Jeremy. One from Andreas Lennart, who asks you, after you respond to Naomi, to talk a bit more about your PhD project, which professions you're also planning to analyze besides the Zagag. But first, answer Nomi Sarig. Nomi says she's noticed that some of the documents are written in a mixture of several languages. Is this observation correct? And how common was this practice?
Of course. I failed to mention that point, but in the first two contracts, I showed you the one from 1057, yes. Yes, of course, I'm sorry, I failed to mention it, but You can't see that. So this is not like there is a first point, a second point, a third point. The first one is in Aramaic, the second is in Judeo-Arabic. But this is natural. For at that time, that was natural to make the first invocations and final greetings, or the mention of the Kinyan, for example, to make it in Hebrew and of course a mixture of Hebrew and Aramaic, but it is really natural. We can find that type of this is a practice really widespread, but the description itself of the deed, what is involved, for example, the type of work, the duration, the specific conditions, the wage, etc., etc. It has to be understandable the best way. So of course it is described in Judeo-Arabic. So really the basic language used at that time for those peoples. And yes, you have always this construction, the initial invocation, as I showed you, it was in red, I think I remember. So this is the Hebrew part. Then you have the description of the deed itself, the object of the deed, if it's the employment, if it's the partnership, etc. In Judeo-Arabic, and back in Hebrew for the final greetings, Kinyan and localization, etc., etc. For the question of Andreas, here I talked about glass, but my project of research is really global. It's more about the impact on the personal life of the individuals. So I aim to also study, for example, the ketubot, where the employment of the husband or the wife can be involved in the ketubah. So it's rather the impact on the personal life more than economical and legal questions, where we have already many responses from the works of Moshe Gil, from Goldstein, etc., etc., and more recent works, of course. So it's more about the impact on the individual that interests me for my PhD project.
First of all, we have a clarification from Barbara Perlich, who's telling us about the Erfurt city. The city of Erfurt had a population during the 13th century of 15 to 25,000 inhabitants, which would put it as one of the largest cities in the Reich. So we kind of get an idea of within that framework what the size of the Jewish community was in respect. So that's one aspect that I want to share with you. Another is a question that I have, and I think one of the things that kind of links between two of the lectures that we heard are issues of apprenticeship and also of agency and craftsmen and the levels of craftsmen. Both Nahum and Jeremy, all each from their perspective and relative areas of study, spoke of these relationships. Can you maybe talk a bit more about the relationship between a master and an apprentice, and maybe something also about how labor is procured through agents? There was a reference in Nahum's lecture to that, so maybe you can expand a bit more about that, and maybe Jeremy also can say something about these issues through the documents that he's been looking at.
Well, you've got three different aspects. I don't know, that would have to be cross-referenced once again synchronically to see if in other occupations these things existed. The background information of their wages, respective wages and levels of proficiency do not appear in Responsa. These need to be furnished by our colleagues looking from the other angle, such as commerce and trade and fairs in medieval Spain. And this is what I have done. And I think there's more to come.
Jeremy?
Yes, I was meanwhile searching for a manuscript. If you allow me to share my screen for a second. So where is it? It's here. So I talked to you about another document that I did not mention in my communication. It's this one. Here you get the reference if you want to check it a bit better. For the question of apprenticeship, this document is very valuable to us. So we can see here, for example, it's really a raw example once again, that a father is making a contract with a businessman or owner of a factory of a weaver, simply, and this boss will have the responsibility to teach his son to the craft. And there is a very specific clause that will maybe give you an illustration in answer to the question. The boy will have the responsibility to be serious at work. It's written like that, to attend to his formation, etc., and to be very serious and a good boy, etc., etc. But on the other side, the weaver will have the responsibility to form him well, in order to make him as an equal to a skilled craftsman. It is written really literally like that. The boy will have to reach the level of Sanir. If not, he will have to pay him the regular wage of a Sanir. If not. So there is also responsibility on the other side. Excuse me. And I of course invite you to check this document if you have if you want other details. I didn't have time to make the translation here, but it was a bare like that an example.
So two more questions for you. One is a comment. Actually, it's a comment by Benjamin Arbel, who literally read my mind. Benjamin Arbel says, collaboration with non-Jews has a great advantage in glass making, and I would also add in jewel making, especially if you're melting metal, considering that you would have to keep the kiln operating at a high temperature without interruption, as it still works today. So there is a definite advantage at keeping the kiln working at a high temperature, especially for those two trades mentioned in Maimonides' response. So that's one comment. And the other is a question from Vera Henkelmann to Jeremy. Could the red glass be used for lamps? This would also fit the import of regional glass products. Colorless Muslim glass lamps were decorated with colors. Perhaps such colorless lamps, they were reworked in the workshop that you described, the one with importing the glass from Beirut. Jeremy?
Yeah, is there a specific question?
Do you know? No, the question was whether you know of whether these were colored lamps or you were talking about red glass.
Yeah,
right?
because it's described like that, but we don't have, of course, we don't have the archaeological findings corresponding to those manuscripts. I remember of very beautiful glasswork with decoration and colors, but it's really a magnificent object, and it's really later in the time.
It's windows, stained glass windows. That's important because stained glass windows are used in synagogue as in mosque. And the question is about making the glass not only for small items, but for big productions. Stained glass windows contains red glass in mosques as in synagogues.
Okay. So thank you. This is a detail I didn't know. I didn't do the connection between the two things.
So First of all, I think this is a fabulous location to make such connections, because we have archaeologists, we have art historians, we have textual historians, and this is exactly, this kind of workshop is exactly, although, albeit that we are doing this via Zoom, but you can, I think, always be in touch with the organizers, with Andreas and Maria, and they can put, create the connections. I would also now want to open the floor or the Zoom or whatever you want to call it. We still have about 10 minutes. So if people would want to ask questions now, that would be a good time. I'm going to open the screen in a way that I will see everyone. And that way, if you raise your hand, I'll be able to see you. Okay, so let's try and do that now. Yes, Ilana Tahan, please.
Yeah, well, I put them in the chart, Ephraim, but
okay.
Maybe there are too many. My first question was actually to Karin, and I asked whether the bakeries that she showed in so many different German towns were there for communal use, that the Jews could also participate and bake their goods, or were they only for the Christian community?
It's a good question. Of course, this is a question that goes beyond archaeological evidence. So we have been discussing this before. I think we must consult the halachic specialists, because I think the Christian bakers could provide the ovens, but the question is, were the Jews allowed to use the Christian bakeries?
I think that the evidence that we have, Yitzhak, yes, please.
Pardon?
Open your mic.
I agree with you, Effie. We don't have any halachic evidence concerning using non-Jewish ovens. So that, or at least I don't remember any evidence of that sort. So I think that it's very unlikely that Jews used non-Jewish ovens. I'm ready to look it over again. If Effie knows more than me, please don't.
I'm speaking off the top of my head here, and I haven't checked this out, but if memory serves, I think there are halachic questions concerning different kinds of baking produces, and the question to what extent they are completely airtight, and whether they can be heated in a non-Jewish oven, really? Depending on whether the scent of anything that was baked in that oven would enter into the Jewish pastry. So I think there is use of kind of shared ovens, and we have, of course, if again memory serves, there's discussions in the response of Rashi about people using a shared oven and whether they can continue using it on Passover, where it is clear that the non-Jews are using the oven for baking bread, which is of course not a problem because it's their bread. But on the other hand, Jews would want to continue using the oven for their Passover products, and which are supposed to be kosher for Passover. So I think this kind of does indicate that there is shared use. The question is whether this is during the entire duration of the Middle Ages, or is this is something that would eventually, Jews would eventually separate their own. But this is definitely something to look into and collect the evidence.
Well, that's very interesting. And my second question, Ephraim, was to address to Jeremy. And it was whether he only used documents from the Geniza in the Taylor Schechter collection, or whether he went beyond that for these bilateral contracts. Did he use other Geniza collections from other libraries?
Yes, of course. I use documents from New York, from the Jewish Theological Seminary and Oxford. And there is also a manuscript from St. Petersburg. I saw, I remember, no, it's not absolutely not limited to a Taylor Schechter collection.
I dare not ask, Jeremy, but you didn't find anything in our collection, I assume?
What?
In the British Library, we have Geniza fragments as well. So did you find anything in our collection?
I think that right now, no, I've only found in Oxford, but maybe one day, we never know. It's not.
Just a question out of curiosity. Thank you so much, both of you, and Karin as well. Thank you.
Yes, Nomi Feuchtwagen, sorry.
If I am not mistaken, the Berta Dagada shows a baking scene in which there are Jews and non-Jews concurrently working on the production of the matzot, mainly actually, where the piercing is taking place, the piercing of the matzot. And there's special reference to Jews wearing the Jew's hat and those who are piercing the matzot who are not. That may be some help to the question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed.
Sorry if I interject.
Annette, yeah, Annette, please.
This, in my opinion, is not the case. The people represented in the bird's head Haggadah as the piercing of the Masot are the youngsters, because it's the whole family who is baking, and the adults are pronouncing the bracha, while the women are kneading the dough, and the youngsters, which have not yet the heads, because they didn't have the age of 13, they are not yet bar mitzvah, they do not have the hat. I think this is the whole family baking, and I would like to continue. To my knowledge, the community of Worms has had a special oven for the matzot. There is an information about that in the 17th century report of Jus Beschames, that there was a special oven for the matzot, and it was a special payment to be made in order to pay the one who baked the matzot. So yes, we have distinct ovens, at least in some communities. But I have another question to Karin. Is there any Christian oven known as big as the Erfurt one? Because I know that there were communal bakeries also in Christian cities used by Christians. But do we have any evidence that there is a big oven like that as in Erfurt?
I showed you the archaeological evidences that I have found so far, and that was it. There is no bigger oven.
So
not even an oven as big as the one that I've shown from Erfurt.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, folks, I would like to hand it over to Sarah, who probably will have some announcements regarding both the last session and the get-together, the social get-together that concludes this this conference. I want to thank all of you for attending. I want to thank the speakers again for both their lectures and for participating in the questions and answer and being patient with us. And I want to thank you all for a fabulous conference and the organizers. So I hand it over to Sarah Apel.
Thanks very much, Effie.
I have the big pleasure to introduce Nomi Feuchtwanger-Sarik. She is an adjunct assistant professor at the Ono Academic College in Jerusalem and senior fellow at the Research Center Dynamics of Jewish Ritual Practices at the Max Weber Kolleg in Erfurt at the University of Erfurt. Her main fields of interest are Jewish material and visual culture, as well as the study of Christian theologian and Hebraist writings on Jewish rites and rituals, that shed light on ritual and ceremonial objects and synagogue architecture and furnishings. She's the author of numerous studies on Jewish art and visual culture, and her new book, Thy Father's Instruction, Reading the Nuremberg Miscellany as Jewish Cultural History, is in final stages now. Congrats, Nomi, before publication, as part of the Goldstein-Goren Center's series Rethinking Diaspora with the Kruiter Publishing House. Furthermore, she is working currently on the invention of textual and visual printed tradition, the Minhagim Buch by Shimeon Halevi Günzburg, which was printed in Venice in 1533. And this work is done by Nomi in collaboration with Jean Baumgarten. And today she is speaking about Judaizing objects, the unprofessional Jewish craftsman. So please, Nomi, share your screen and start your lecture.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's lovely to see everybody, but we'll talk about it later. Now we're doing the professional part. In the past 2.5 days, we've been discussing a rich array of Jewish crafts, presenting works of art against the backdrop of the non-Jewish art scene. We have heard about the craftspeople of many trades who practice their profession in many lands and in different cultural realms and times. The personages involved were all more or less skilled people, trained in their respective trades and enjoying due esteem in their communities. Some of them are even known to us by name, either through signatures on their works or through archival sources. In my paper, I would like to ask you to join me in a journey that will take us not only to a later time zone, concentrating mainly on the early modern period, please bear with me, but also to a different sphere of Jewish ritual culture. If I may plagiarize, we will travel beyond the elite to art that was made for or by members of the community who fashioned works of art, of Jewish art. Concentrating on 3 main foci, we will ponder the communally used designations of high art and low or folk art. I propose to challenge the elitistic terms of artist, artisan, or craftsman and suggest broadening our outlook to include the unprofessional individual who created Judaica ad hoc out of desire or necessity. Broadening the definition of Jewish craftspeople, this paper highlights the lay Jew, any Jew, whose work of art is equally worthy of being defined as such. We will, in effect, probe into the seminal question that has been raised by generations of art historians, namely, what is Jewish art? In pursuing this approach, I'm following in the footsteps of 2 people who have paved my way into understanding the essence of Jewish art and visual culture. The first was my grandfather, the late Dr. Heinrich Feuchtwanger, one of the first Judaica collectors who had a special liking for objects made of simple, lesser materials. My other guideline is the definition of Jewish art offered by my teacher and mentor, Professor Bezalel Narkis, who embraced under this umbrella everything that was created by Jews, for Jews, or was used by Jews. We will therefore largely depart from the Jewish patrons who could commission specially designed objects at their will and high cost. Instead, we will focus on the majority of the Jewish society who, lacking excessive fiscal assets, often had to do with the off-the-shelf, mass-made merchandise. We will illustrate some of the ways in which colloquial common items were converted to fit Jewish life and could be suited for both daily needs, home liturgies, or ceremonial synagogue use. Living as a minority among the nations, the Jews maintained a twofold life. While adhering to the faith of their forefathers, following the rites and customs of Jewish tradition, they nonetheless shared the material culture of the general society. These warp and woof threads made the fabric of their lives among their Christian neighbors. I therefore wish to argue that appropriation and adaptation of objects from the Christian world for Jewish use was by far more widespread than is reflected in academic studies. Important work has been done by the late Vivian Mann in her article, New Emphasis on Jewish Ceremonial Art from Medieval Ashkenaz, in which she describes some medieval artifacts that have been adapted to or converted for Jewish use. In recent decades, other examples have surfaced. Visual culture was one of the main meeting points of Jews and non-Jews in the Middle Ages and early modern period. Material goods were available to both groups of society. It seems, therefore, that the shared use and some subtle methods of converting non-Jewish items have been overlooked, blurring our awareness of the extent of Judaization of objects. To that, we should add the loss of artifacts due to melting down for secondary or tertiary use, wear and tear, and loss in disaster, but also the unassuming nature and lesser and often perishable materials of some objects. Such is the case, for example, with a small group of silver and ebony Torah pointers of Dutch origin. In their material, as well as in their formal concept, they cannot be discerned from coeval objects that were used in the Catholic Church, the digitus. So much so that it stands to reason that the two types represent a local preference and manufacture in Maastricht around the late 18th through the 19th century. Likewise, the mid-19th century sugar bowl from Vienna, shown on the right, could be easily mistaken for an etrog box from around the same time. Or is it the other way around? Sharing style and proportions and adorned with a grip in the form of a small fruit, they reflect à la mode examples of silverwork. Similar items served as jewelry boxes and were fitted with a key. Yet for the Jewish owner, the fruit knob on the lid may have been more than a practical device or a decorative element. It insinuated an etrog. So what makes the Torah pointer from Maastricht and the etrog box from Vienna into a Jewish object? The answer is simple. They were both taken over from a mundane or even Christian realm, redefined and introduced into a Jewish context. In such cases, as in many others, it is the use and sometimes the curator's decision that determines the ascription of these objects. Sharing material, this is my manuscript just for them. Sharing material goods was naturally common in the upper strata of Jewish society as well. This late 16th century German miscellany was presumably made for and also by a member of the famous Ulmer Günzburg family of exceptionally great wealth. A token of the richness is the bulged double beaker seen on the upper right of the page. Similarly extravagantly sized vessels were designed by one of the leading artisans at the time, Albrecht, most likely as models. The image in the Nuremberg miscellany, as well as a related object bearing a Hebrew inscription on its rim, are proof that Jews of means procured such luxury items whose mere ownership defines them as Jewish. Most of the Jews used mass-made objects that were on the market for anyone, Christians and Jews alike. Individual modifications were then introduced by their owners for their own personal needs. Thus, a simple pewter plate, a widely used article found in most households, could be inscribed basar or chalab by its Jewish owner, or be easily transformed into a Purim or Passover plate by adding some relevant words and decorations.
Nomi, just a moment, please. You seem to have stopped your camera. Could you turn it back on, please?
My goodness, yes. Sorry about that. Okay. These homemade modifications grant the plates access to any Jewish museum's collection. The borderline between Jewish and non-Jewish is indeed often very fuzzy. In absence of knowledge about its history and provenance, or any hint on the object itself, it is impossible to tell whether, say, the pair of candlesticks are to be considered Jewish or not. Similarly, a hand-washing basin such as this one, made in Zurich in 1729, was a domestic object that was used also by Jews, specifically for netilat yadayim before meals. In synagogues, it served the worshippers to cleanse their hands upon entering the holy premises. The ascription of such an object as Jewish must therefore be determined by its provenance, origin, and ownership, often though by its later secondary use. Refunctioning a common object, such as a grooming comb for the horse's mane and tail, to one that served members of the Chevra Kadisha for preparing the corpse for burial is rather tantalizing, but not all too rare. This one bears the name of its donors, who were at the same time also the officers, the Gabaim, of a Moravian burial society. Similar combs with added elaboration on top show once again how, by grace of a dedicatory inscription, any object could be converted to serve a Jewish purpose. The woman Faiga could thus donate the local burial society a gift to commemorate her husband, Yosef ben Yitzchak Segal, seen here on the right. When looking at these goods then, we must distinguish between the original object, often acquired as ready-made, and the proprietor's subsequent personalized edition, sometimes at a much later period. A long time, not only the designation was altered, but also the dating, which should refer to the two phases. A fine example to that effect is the aquamanil, or washing basin, crafted in the late 12th century. Its origin and provenance are unknown. Neither do we know in what context it was used, in other words, Jewish or Christian. The inscription on the lion's back suggests, though, that several centuries later, it was donated to a synagogue by Brachia Segal for the ritual hand washing of the Kohanim. In other words, the secular basin was thereby newly defined as a Jewish object fit for the synagogue. Beyond dedicatory inscriptions, personal identifiers or practical aids such as the notation kasher, basar, equally illustrative is insertion of apotropaic devices onto objects of Jewish use. A state-of-the-art rocking crib is shown on the lower margin of the page in the Nuremberg Miscellany mentioned above, penned and illustrated in 1589. Incised on its narrow side, we see a large Magen David. It was meant to offer protection to the newborn child, very much like the often used monograms of Jesus or Mary on similar cradles. The crib shown in the manuscript may have been initially decorated with this symbol by the carpenter who crafted it, whether Jewish or not. Alternatively, the owner himself may have carved it when the object first came into his possession. Some interesting examples of the Judaization process present an utter change of the original object and its function. Take, for example, a group of Hanukkah lamps that were crafted from cast-off items and in secondary use were reworked into Jewish ceremonial objects. The frontal plate of a grenadier's helmet made of brass sheet was too precious to be discarded when it became obsolete. It bears the monograms of Maria Theresa and Friedrich I of Austria. How it came to the hands of the Jewish owner evades us. More importantly, what counts is the use he made of it, converting it into the back wall and reflector of a Hanukkah lamp and adding to it a row of oil receptacles. A similar lamp bears a logo as its central motif in its iconographic scheme. It is a three-letter logo of the Dutch East India Company, a mega corporation of Dutch trading companies that was founded in 1702. The enigmatic way in which the back sheet came into the possession of the Jewish owner notwithstanding, it has been converted into a Hanukkah lamp fitted with oil receptacles and a dripping pane. Judaizing of mundane objects comes to light also in their elevation into ritual objects. Among other trades, the Jews in Europe made their living through commerce in secondhand luxury fabrics. These were typically sold to the local high classes. Another option was to fashion them into lavish parochot, me'ilim, and other synagogue textiles. One special example was made presumably in Bohemia and bears the date 1825. Scraps of fabric exposing noticeable wear and tear were sewn together to form its main body. An additional solid velvet piece at the top allowed for the embroidery of a dedicatory inscription. A third component occupies the center, fastened to it by a gold ribbon. It too has been cut and put together to form. Tracing its original use, we can discern buttonholes on the left-hand side, a neckline, armholes, and pocket lapels. Apparently, this has been a man's vest that was eventually rearranged and reworked to form part of the Torah curtain. Originally belonging to a Christian, most probably, its placement in a synagogue so near to the Torah ark epitomizes the sages' understanding of the verse from Exodus 15:2. This is my God and I will honor him, which they interpreted as applying to glorification of the mitzvot through the objects that serve to fulfill them. It further underscores the understanding and practical implementation of the Talmudic injunction from Menachot 39a, namely, what is holy we may raise to a higher degree of sanctity, but not bring down. The process of Judaizing objects may have been premeditated already when it was designed to be crafted. The so-called Bodleian bowl, ascribed to the 13th century, has a close parallel in the three-legged cooking pot, probably from Italy, dated to a later period. This type of cooking device developed in the 12th century and was first made from earthenware. It soon became popular all over Europe, validating our comparison with a Bodleian bowl with yet another example. The three vessels presented here have the same function and form, save the unique decoration on the Bodleian bowl that includes a Hebrew inscription running around its belly, thereby clearly designating it as a Jewish object. Who was the master who was actually responsible for the design of the Jewish cauldron? Such questions are always raised with regard to Hebrew inscriptions, but more often than not, such deliberations do not lead to an undisputable conclusion. Tankards were and still are a popular form of German beer mugs. Earthenware vessels are mostly favored due to their insulation qualities. Pewter lids and sometimes also base rings form part and parcel of the design. Jews, of course, shared in the liking of beer, mostly using mass-made objects. However, special occasions called for custom production. This Weizenkrug, shown on the right, was made to order by either an individual or a community for the celebration of Purim. Its iconography includes 3 fish, alluding to the zodiac sign of Adar, and the inscription, Mishenichnas Adar, namely, when the month of Adar begins, we increase our joy. Missing the last word of the saying, taken from Babylonian Talmud, Ta'anit 29a, the imperfect shape of the bet and the final nun too short may suggest that the mug was painted and inscribed by a non-Jew in one of the local workshops, probably following instructions from those who commissioned it, or perhaps by a Jew who was not sufficiently versed in Hebrew. For lack of further data, this matter remains unsolved, although the supposition that it was not an object of Jewish manufacture seems more plausible. The lid, however, carries the 2 letters Aleph and Shin, perhaps the owner's initials, that he may have added at a later date. As a side note, I have found no support for the Magnus Museum's identification of the object as, quote, pitcher for collecting offerings on Purim. Oyster plates were obviously not part of the Jewish kitchen cabinet. On one occasion, though, they did appear in some Jewish homes, festively placed on the Seder table. The partitions of this type of plates perfectly fitted the custom to present the various condiments that are served during the ceremony. In this case, unlike the architect Louis Sullivan's maxim, it is not the form that followed the function, but the function that instigated the adoption and adaptation of a given form. It should be noted, however, that in both the beer mug and the Seder plates, the Judaization was most probably performed by a non-Jew before the object was burnt in the kiln. We've talked about it a little bit yesterday, but still. Judaizing an object can also entail abstention. When registering a spice box in 1550, for example, a Christian silversmith used the well-known nomenclature Judenmonstranz for the object he has crafted for a Jew. Indeed, the 2 objects were modeled according to similar formal conventions from the High Middle Ages on. It is precisely for this reason that it was imperative to ensure that the result will not be offensive to the Jewish customer in any way. Christian symbols, such as those that typically embellish monstrances, reliquaries, ostensoria, and similar paraphernalia, mainly the cross finial at the top of the object, were therefore not included in the spice box's decoration. One of the earliest surviving spice boxes is dated to the early 16th century. It is an edifice shaped like a Gothic tower monstrance with small turrets attached to the body and a globular finial atop. It is, however, unclear whether this was originally conceived of as a Jewish spice box. Especially suspicious are the 8-lobed base and the nodus at the center of the shaft that are typical of Christian ritual objects. And yet support for its use as a Jewish spice box, even if not its primary intent, and thereby its inclusion in the holdings of the Israel Museum's Judaica department, comes from a contemporary Jewish visual source. Once again, we turn to the Nuremberg Miscellany, and specifically to the Havdalah scene in it. The formal affinity of the spice box in the manuscript to the one in the Israel Museum collection leaves very little doubt that such objects were in vogue among Jews in Germany in the late 16th century. This is the entire scene. The other protagonist of the image in the miscellany conveniently carries us over to the juxtaposition of high art and low art, with the additional distinction of folk art. Standing on a stool, the boy is raising a braided candle, yet unlit, held in a wooden device known as Havdalah Holz. Made from a perishable, inexpensive substance, carving such an object did not entail the work of an artist, an artisan, or a craftsman. All that was needed was wood that is readily accessible and a good pair of hands. Brought into context, hieratic distinctions between artists, artisans, craftsmen, or makers seems somewhat problematic, especially since we tend to associate them with financial assets. The two objects appear together on one page, showing one scene and highlighting the positions of one extremely affluent family. In the eyes of the manuscript's artist, both the silver spice box and the wooden candle holder were equally valued. What then makes an object Jewish? It seems that its intended designation and actual use, more than anything else, are crucial for the definition and identification of mundane as well as ritual and ceremonial implements of the respective religions. However, its Jewishness may also be defined by its dedication as such by its user, be it a private person or a community, be it an originally Jewish object or one that has been converted to serve for Jewish use. In this process, intervention of the neutrality, so to speak, of the object may be subtle or pronounced. As a result, the result, to be sure, remains decidedly the same, regardless of the religious identity of the individual who performed the adaptation and thus Judaized the object, and whether he was a professional trained artist or a simpleton, as it were. Yet these persons crafted mundane objects into such that by virtue of this, their very deed, should be considered as Jewish art and are duly included in Judaica collections worldwide. Judaism in this context is not a matter of rank, financial ability, or training. Reframing and refunctioning of metal goods from the Christian or general mundane realm into the Jewish world was a natural process of acculturation. As such, it also adds an enriching facet to Jewish cultural history and to the study of Jewish art and material culture. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Naomi. If somebody would have a question, he or she or he can just jump in. If this is not the case, I will move to the other, just raise your hand. But if this is not the case, I would like to start with my own question. Naomi, what you have shown us are really wonderful examples of that, what we often quote, this shared culture between Christians and Jews. But I have a question in the context of our own workshop here dealing with Jewish craftspeople. Do you have any hints, any evidence on the Jewishness of the craftspeople who did so, who Judaized these objects? Because that's what we are dealing with here. I would be very interested in that.
I'm afraid that most of my answer will be a supposition, namely the objects being relatively simple for the most part do not bear a hallmark of their makers and do not bear a hallmark of those who've changed them, unfortunately. But there's room to speculate and assume that many of these objects were Judaized, as I like calling them, or converted, if you wish, by Jews for their own use. The scribbling, for example, on the pewter plates, or the inscriptions, if you please, are most probably Jewish manufacture or Jewish additions, as many other changes that have been introduced into the objects that I've shown. I would suspect that except for maybe objects like the kiln-burnt objects, they were produced by Jews. They were introduced by Jews. Of course, the samim was definitely not made by a Jew, but it was actually converted to Jewish use, and that's what makes it Jewish.
Does somebody else want to ask something or add something or remark something? Annette Weber?
Yes, unfortunately, I wasn't able to join in at the very beginning of the lecture, but I have a question regarding pewter plates. There we have marks, quite often so, and these marks show that these were non-Jewish producers of pewter plates, and this was the regular case. And most of the inscriptions seem to have been added by Jews themselves, sometimes in a very unequal script, very private, let's say it. But there were other inscriptions who reveal a certain degree of training in the making of the inscription. And I wonder whether this kind of engraving is due to the knowledge of seal engravings, which we know of and that we know of as a Jewish profession. Do you have any reports of making these inscriptions on pewter plates, especially cedar plates, by seal engravers, or that seal engravers were diversifying their trade?
I'm not sure I can answer this. I'm not familiar with seal engravings as much as I would have liked to, but the medium is is very different. The size is different. The actual engraving, I think, is also produced in a different manner. So I'm not sure this is where I would be looking for the answer. Some of the inscriptions, you're right, are done semi or professionally by people who are well-versed both with the writing process and with the ability to hold whatever utensil they were using to inscribe, as well as planning the space that they used for the inscription. So maybe we should go looking for the answer someplace else, maybe even Torah scribes? Not sure.
Before going back to Annette Weber, I would like to go to some questions that arrived during the talk in the chat. But I would love to ask the people to ask the questions themselves. It's much easier to react. The first was from Josefina Rodriguez. Are you here somewhere and can you ask your question yourself? No, so I will just read it. Does anybody know, and this question is for the whole audience, does anybody know how it was called in medieval Hebrew, the little banner put on the top of some of the medieval spice boxes? Was the term used in medieval Hebrew? And I can't read this, but look in the chat.
Degel.
Okay. Thank you, Eva. Nomi, do you want to answer somebody else?
I've not been dealing sufficiently with the text relevant to my paper. My purpose in this paper was really to be a little bit provocative. So that still needs to be done. Looking for those relevant texts, the nomenclature and so on and so forth is the next step. So thank you, Josefina.
Thank you, Nomi. So the next one is from Fanny Gagova. Maybe she can ask, or he, I don't know. It's a she.
Yeah.
Thanks God. Can ask the question herself.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for this great workshop, actually, to us. So my question was going in the direction, I do think that this is absolutely important what you pointed out, the secondary use of objects which are not originally from a Jewish context. But I was wondering about objects which are not inscribed or which do not have then marks of being Jewish because of, well, no Hebrew inscription and so on. How can we tackle this invisibility of those objects, which are still somehow connected to a Jewish use in Jewish context? Thank you.
I would then suggest that we try and trace the history of the object, namely its producer, its context, its provenance, its maker, whatever we can, because otherwise we can really not tell. We can really not tell that if there's no indication, it's a lost case, I think, unfortunately, which is again, one of the reasons why so many of these shared objects are lost to us as Jewish objects.
Maria, you're on mute.
Sorry, even lost for us as objects itself, themselves, because we have so less objects from the Middle Ages to talk about that properly. So there are 3 people in the, oh, no more. Yeah, no, the chat is going on. So I just take the one from Sophia Buda from the chat. Sophia, would you like to ask a question? Yeah, here you are.
Hi, thank you so much. It was absolutely fascinating. When you showed us the digitus, the Christian digitus and the pointer, it occurred to me that, do you know about any halachical sources which discuss, ban or permit the refunctioning of, let's say, Christian, clearly ritual objects? Or
The question of the digitus is much too problematic because there is close to absolutely no literature on the object. The one I saw, the first one I saw was actually in Amsterdam. That's the one I showed you. I've seen a number of others, and whenever I asked curators or researchers, their answer was, we know it existed, we no longer use it, we have no idea what it was ever used for. So that raises the question, what came first?
Ah, yes, yes.
And to what extent did the Jews borrow from the Christians in this case, or the other way around? I wrote an article about the origin of the Torah pointer. I'll be happy to share it with you. I have the feeling that it's part of this development that started basically with chironomy and went on to Gregorian chant and so on and so forth. So it's maybe a shared development or a parallel development, but in the case of the digitus, I cannot say much more than that. I'm sorry, Sophie.
Thank you. But do we know how they used it?
No.
Okay.
No, I've searched all over wherever.
Thank you.
I hope somebody will still be able to answer this for me.
I would be I would love to read your article, please, if you could.
I'll send it to you. Sure.
Cheers.
Gladly.
Thank you.
So the next question comes from Jack Hartnell. He's waiting in the line all the time. So please, Jack, ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for this really rich and interesting paper and for the provocation. It reminds me in lots of ways about, I work a lot on medical material, in particular medical recipes, which, you know, there's a whole range of things which in the similar periods to what you're talking about in a medical sense are things that are being, you could argue, are being Judaized in similar ways. And so I think it's really interesting to think about this term and how it connects interdisciplinary, not just amongst those disciplines represented here, but beyond. My question was a bit more specific. It was about those Havdalah Holtz wooden objects that you raised, because the visual material I work with is maybe a little bit earlier than a lot of this material. But I was curious about what you said and how you kind of, your point around those about the unprofessional craftsman, and your suggestion that, you know, all you need to do to make one of these things to have a bit of wood and to kind of and a bit of skill. But obviously the ones you show are extremely kind of complex and really interesting objects. I would assume are made by professional craftsmen, or craftspeople. So I was just curious about, is that supposition in terms of this unprofessional kind of worker in those particular examples, those in that particular genre of object, or are there sources that you're kind of working with that give you the impression that this could be done in a kind of much more simplistic way? I just wanted to hear a bit more about your thoughts on kind of the unprofessionalness of those objects. It was really interesting.
Like I confessed, I haven't searched for the written material yet, but my feeling is that many of those objects were not necessarily crafted by skilled people. In other words, we know that in Eastern Europe, for example, they crafted mezuzot. It was the yeshiva students who had sometimes free time and took a piece of wood and crafted objects for their use. And I assume that the same process occurred in other parts of the Jewish diaspora as well, not necessarily entailing a Jewish craftsperson. But I will certainly look for texts to support either assumption.
Thanks.
Okay, the next one is Hila.
Manuel, I see you, Eva. Hila, maybe you will ask your question.
Yes, thank you for the fascinating talk. I'm also very interested in material conversion of objects, and I wanted to ask, how do you think that the pawning mechanism is generated those converted objects, and also because there are signs for this secondary use also in the responsa, where Jews take those objects and put them, for example, on the Seder table and use them. Of course, they weren't supposed to use them in ritualic manners, but also for display. And perhaps I missed it, but I also wanted to ask, where is the wooden base for the Havdalah candle is today, when you showed?
I'm not sure I got the second part of your question, but I'll answer the first one first. Pawn shops have definitely played a decisive role in the Judaization of objects, because these objects fell into Jewish use. So that was quite a clear-cut case. The other option was, like I mentioned, I think, going to a craftsperson and saying, I want you to make me something that looks like what you have in your model book, but please delete or eliminate these and these things, make it squat or make it larger, make the opening or whatever for my use. And that was another way of, in a way, Judaizing the concept of the object, even if not the object itself. So I'm sure that pawn shops really played a very, very important role in the transformation of objects into Judaism and to Jewish use. The other question, I'm not really sure that I got.
I asked about the wooden instrument for the Havdalah candle.
Yes.
The architectural one. Where is it displayed today? Where is it?
Let me try. I can't tell you about the first one. I don't remember by heart. The other one is in the Wolfson Museum here in Jerusalem, the very, very long one. It is the earliest, or one of the earliest we have, not the very earliest. And it's in the Hechal Shlomo Wolfson Museum here in Jerusalem.
Thank you.
But we do have a number of those objects.
Maybe I can just add something to the last thing Nomi said. The first part of the answer for your question. If you look at cities like Cologne, Regensburg, Worms, even Erfurt, where you have really a huge Jewish community, I guess, craftspeople, Jewish and Christian, also producing for this market. So they know how a Hanukkah lamp should look like. So maybe they have it on their table as well, besides the candelier sticks for everyone who wants to use it. So I think we don't have to go this turn using the pawn brokers. I guess Jews knew about this. That's the meaning of shared culture. Knew about this objects. Okay, if you would like to adopt something, some form, then you can go like make this, but for our use like that. And I think that's why I would like to get in or take in Ulrich Berzbach's question here, because it fits very well for that. Because he was asking me in private chat, that's why you can't see it, about why would somebody take, and Ulrich is there, he can ask this question himself, why you would take the form of a monstrance for a spice box, because the function is so different. But ask yourself, Ulrich.
Okay, thank you for this wonderful presentation, Naomi, as ever. I'm just wondering why this form of a monstrance was so attractive for the Jewish owner of the object. Maria suggested that it might have been that architecture was just à la mode in those days, but still then I have the same question: why is it so attractive to take something from a big form like a church tree, a church migdal, what's the English word? I forgot, you know what I mean, into such a small form? Or if it comes from a monstrance, why do you take a form that is meant to show something into something that is meant to smell it?
The monstrance is the nomenclature used in this document as well as in others sometimes, but it's not necessarily the monstrance. You're right, the monstrance is there to show usually, but there are other objects in the Christian paraphernalia, like censers, for example, that developed in the same kind of form like the Jewish objects. In other words, a turreted object that gradually grew taller and taller from the early periods, from, let's say, Roman, Byzantine, etc. periods. They gradually grew taller. I know that the use is slightly different, because when you're using a censer, you actually burn the sweet smelling material. Whereas in the spice box, what you do is you use them fresh or dried. So I know that there's a difference, but the association and the connotation may have also led to the shared shape of the object. So if you're talking about also macro and micro, if you want to go one step further, take the, what's it called, the Schöne Brunnen in Nuremberg, and that's basically a spice box or a reliquary or whatever. So this transformation, transmittal of micro and macro was also present. I mean, the Jews saw these objects and could have said, that's it. That's what we want. Or the maker could have decided, I want someone that's more accessible to a smaller pocket.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, moving on to Eva. Eva Fromowicz, it's your turn, because you raised your hand.
Oh, okay. Oh, I can unraise it in a minute. Thank you so much. So fascinating. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Naomi. Learned so much. I was just coming back to the thing about the pewter plates, and it made me think of printers, or rather not the printers themselves, but the font cutters. But of course, then we have another problem, because some of the most amazing font cutters are known to have been not Jewish, Hebrew font cutters. So, which I think makes me wonder whether, your paper could just be continued for another hour by talking about books and books and printing in the, I mean, printed books. We've talked about scribes, but you know, early printing, which you could say is sort of still a bit medieval.
May I ask directly to that? May I answer directly to that? I think you can exclude printers because of the script. The script is very specific and it needs training in the so-called quadrata. And this is no longer performed in printing except very few places. And that's why I think you have to go either in the direction of the Torah scribes, the Sofrim, and regard them as a kind of Jewish craftsmen as well, because they diversified. They did not only the writing of the Torah, but also of the wimples, that means liturgical objects in any sense. And a Seder plate is a liturgic object as well. So you have to regard the Torah scribes as Jewish craftsmen par excellence. But I would exclude the printers because I have rarely seen printing types used in inscription, especially in German pewter plates, not at all.
We must also remember that beyond the official Sofrim, the Torah scribes, many other people could write. I mean, if you have a look at this manuscript I've been working on and will finally be published, the scribe knew how to write. He knew how to plan his page. He knew how to justify the left margin and so on and so forth, actually suggesting that he was a semi-professional or whatever you want to designate him. He knew how to write. He knew how to write Hebrew. He could just operate on the art or skill of Hebrew writing. So we don't necessarily have to go to Torah scribes for inscribing something that is entirely on a different scale or spectrum of daily use.
Yeah, if I may, again, but to my knowledge, we are often talking of very distinct types of letters, which you cannot perform unless you are very well trained. The quadrata you cannot perform just if you know how to write. And I wonder whether one mustn't pay some attention to the different types of lettering. This goes also for the tombstones, because this is not just, except for the very early cases, just a handwriting or knowing the Hebrew script. You have to be trained to do that.
I agree, but this is an entirely different discipline, I think. So I'm not sure we should mix the two things up. Besides which, you're talking about Central Europe. When you go farther east to Eastern Europe, you find matzevot or tombstones that were carved or produced in wood, some of them perhaps by professionals, some of them by lay people who simply scribbled or wrote down or carved the name of the deceased on them. So this is why I'm a little bit suggesting that these definitions of official art, if you please, or high art, or whatever, all those terms, and lower art or lay art, they're a bit blurry. I mean, like, Annette, you mentioned, for example, the Torah binders. Some of them were made by artists, some by scribes, many by men, not only by women. Many were domestically produced, some of them not. So, I mean, even if you take an object that is normally, at first glance, you would say, this is folk art, come on. It isn't, or not necessarily is. So why use these terms that are so misleading? Or let's redefine them.
Well, I totally agree with you. The Torah scribe or not, or the one who knows to write Hebrew in a very precise way, in a very distinct way, is somebody which we have not been searching too much for it. We have very little evidence that Torah scribes were producing tombstones, We have some evidence that they were producing the letters for the Wimples, yes. But what about seal engravers? So I think you are totally right that this gets a little bit blurred, but I think this is the very nature of these Hebrew and Jewish craftsmen. They are working at liminal places in between, and that's why it's so difficult to shape their profession. Let's put it that way.
Hi, Maria, can I ask permission to talk?
Question before we move on to the final discussion, to the concluding discussion. Yes,
Yeah,
Ilana.
First of all, congratulations, Naomi, for this enthralling lecture. Oh, very interesting, most wonderful. Mine is not quite a question, it's rather a comment. I'm sure that most of the audience knows about that, but in the Victoria and Albert Museum, there is an object that when they acquire it in 1855, they thought it was a reliquary. It's produced probably in Limoges in France, but it came from Spain. And they thought it was a Christian object of worship, but eventually after some research, they came to the conclusion that it was in fact a spice book. And it's very interesting. It's not so elaborate as some of the ones you've shown us today, but it is a very interesting object. And it's one of the earliest known because it dates from approximately the 13th to, it was dated 13th to 14th century.
Thank you so much, Ilana.
I'm sure you know of it, and most of our audience knows, I'm sure.
I want to thank you especially because I'm also working now on spice box that is housed in the Jewish Museum in Frankfurt. It's a very elaborate one. It's a very beautiful one. The dating, the origin, all the problems cannot, I'm afraid, it cannot really be solved. It's ascribed to Lvov. I'm not sure on what grounds. It's very similar to Venice, perhaps so. But the problem I have with it, it's been reworked, that's for sure. You can't open it. So how do you insert the spices into it? So this is another place in which maybe Jewish art and non-Jewish art converge, and maybe secondary use simply destroy the object. But it's definitely meant to be a Havdalah spice box, according to its iconography. So again, we're in the dark. And I'm glad that my talk provoked, because that's what it was meant to do.
So much. I'm afraid I have to cut this discussion now because we want to first move on to the concluding discussion and then go to the chat room where we can just talk about these different aspects, maybe in smaller groups. And yeah, I try to. Or we will make sure that the discussion we just started here will move on there. So thank you again, Naomi, for your talk. And now I think let's go back. We moved on now a little bit to modern times and to a general discussion about definitions of different types of art. But let's go back to the medieval craftspeople where we started from. I will start with some concluding remarks, then Andreas will take over, and then we have still time here to discuss maybe some general aspects that it appeared in several lectures and not only in one something. Okay, so during the last 3 days, we heard a lot about Jewish craftspeople around Europe, namely in Spain, Northern Africa, Northern France, German-speaking lands, and Byzantium. And we also learned much about a wide range of crafts carried out by Jewish men and women. And I only want to mention some main occupations. Prevalent was the occupation of Jews in cloth and leather production, like tailors. We heard today about Spanish tailors, dyers, and tanners in Spain or Byzantium. And linked with the leather production was parchment making, and in turn, book production from the scribe and the illustrator up to the bookbinders. Here, of course, a unique role was played by the Sophastam. Mark was telling us about that, the Jewish professional scribe who produced the Torah, but also Tefillin or Mezuzot. But scribes in general also copied other texts, and the example of Paula dei Manzi in Italy testifies to women in this profession too. Similarly, we often heard about metalwork. That seems it's quite important for me, like the production of vessels in Girona or the gold and silversmiths who worked with precious metals, for instance, in Cologne. Rarer documented is the production of luxury goods, such as the processing of silk in Byzantine or coral in Barcelona, for instance. Very seldom are Jews documented as building workers, as we heard from Girona. There, of all things, at the cathedral, I really found that amazing, or as stonemasons. And of course, if you know me a little bit, I liked the most the brewery in Cologne. In rare cases, it seems that it's possible, or it was, that it's possible to identify a particular workshop, such as the one presumably in Erfurt or somewhere else in Thuringia, where the letters in Torah scrolls were written in a not so proper way, or the one Svi Orgat was talking about, where the sister Haggadot, the Yehuda and Second Nuremberg Haggadot were made. Maybe a localization of this workshop will be possible at some point. We heard several times about the collaboration of Jews and Christians in the same workshops. And furthermore, it seems possible for Jews to become a Christian guild member and stay a Jew, at least in rare cases. But some Jews also choose the way of conversion to participate in unique crafts, or at least worked in crafts after having converted. We have seen that the distinction between trade and craft is not sharp. Craftsmen and women sold their own products on one hand, but it was also useful to repair broken goods or recycle the material, especially, but not only for a pawnbroker, as we know that some people often were occupied by more than just one profession. The combination of artisan and commercial skills seems to be useful, for instance, for middlemen and women. Another problematic distinction, and we just talked about something related after the last talk, is the distinction between housework, where a surplus could be sold at the open market, and crafts intending to produce solely for the market. Much of the housework has been disregarded too conveniently, although it relates to crafts. We have to take both works and its products into consideration. This is also true for both spheres, the inner Jewish market, that means the production for the Jewish community, and the production for the free market, also for Christian clients. On the one hand, there are ritual requirements for kosher food production, for example, by butchers and bakers. On the other hand, special regulations, for instance, for the sale to Christians, as we have seen for unique places where non-kosher food was sold. I found it particularly interesting that in Austria, places with small or no Jewish communities tend to have stricter regulations for these specific aspects. And of course, also the relation between the free Jewish craftsmen, and crucial guilds such as goldsmiths and clothiers were also regulated. Okay, I'm finished with my part, and I think Andreas will take over now.
Yes, I will also add a few words. We have seen that the sources we have for Jewish craftspeople are often quite different from those for Christian craftspeople. While the medieval city consisted of craftspeople to a considerably degree, making up the bulk of its inhabitants, Jews were a minority. Naturally, the sources produced about and for Christian craftspeople and its institutions, the guilds, have survived in great numbers, while we have much less evidence for Jewish craftspeople working for Christians. The sources testify to many Christian craftspeople working in the Jewish homes. However, they were often recorded only when local lords or municipalities tried to forbid such work or if something went wrong. Records of court trials can provide information on how frequently Christian craftspeople worked in the homes of Jews. Such a court record from Ingelheim reveals that the Jew Gottschalk paid a Christian roofer called Master Domos, with 2M, for roofing his house in 1425. But this fact was recorded only because something went wrong. Gottschalk had accused the Christian craftsman, Master Domos, of having betrayed him. Gottschalk said he paid for 2 roofer masters, although the roofer who worked with Domos was a simple servant or apprentice. This means that Gottschalk had paid too much to the roofer Domos. But Gottschalk also gave to the protocol that, and I quote, they, the Christian craftsmen, roofed his, that is Gottschalk's house, in a way that now it rains more into his house than before. End of quote. This is why Gottschalk demanded compensation before court, and Domos had to cleanse himself from the accusation by taking an oath on the saints. Sources about Jewish craftspeople, on the other hand, have survived only in much smaller numbers. It is much more challenging to find enough of these and study them. Looking into archaeological, Christian, municipal, art historical, and rabbinic sources is a task worth the effort wherever it can be done, and I think our workshop testified to this fact. Cooperation between Jewish and Christian craftspeople too can be proven quite frequently. Maybe the shofar production in Erfurt, which was done in the 15th century in a Christian workshop with the help of a Jewish craftsman, or may it be wine, meat, parchment, book illumination, or bread. Jewish and Christian bakers, as well as butchers, also shared the same spaces in some cases. As for the butchers, for example, Bishop Henry of Breslau prohibited around the year 1303 this kind of daily slaughtering for all Silesia, since Jews and Christian butchered their meat in the same place. And as for the millers, we can assume that not only the baking in the oven, but also the flour for Pesach had to be checked accordingly. This obviously is the reason why we see in a source from early Worms in the year 1430, from Worms in the year 1438, recorded that local Jews paid 22 dinars because, and I quote again here, because the white mill where the Jews have baked during Lent, end of quote. And by Lent, we can assume that Pesach was, as so often, close to Easter. Jews in this case made sure they had kosher matzot for Pesach and rented the Christian mill for flour, as well as the bakery's oven next by. What is more to do in the future? As we learned from several lecturers, it is essential to work interdisciplinary, especially when researching Jewish craftspeople's phenomenon. Only this way it is possible to consider all different types of sources, written, visual, material, and archaeological. For that, we maybe could search for possible products of Jewish artisans in archaeological excavations, but also treasuries or museums collections. Following the example of the scribe Paula de Manzi, We should look especially for women as artisans. I'm sure there were much more, not only dressmakers, weavers, and embroiderers, but there were also cheesemakers, candle makers, and bookbinders, as well as printers. We also have to examine closer the question of how Jewish craftspeople learned their skills. While Paula likely has learned her craft from members of her family in the 13th century Italy, and the unnamed Jew in Isaac's paper traveled abroad to learn the craft of parchment production, two Jews from the community of Nuremberg were sent to being apprentices at a local Christian goldsmith in the 15th century. It would also be interesting to learn if there were organizations of Jewish craftspeople similar to Christian guilds. We see them at the very end of the Middle Ages in Bohemia. We could easily continue with many more points that are worth examining in more detail. But instead, we wish to open the floor for further comments, ideas, and discussions from your side. Many thanks again for each and every one of you who took part in our workshop by presenting, sharing, and discussing. Special thanks are due again to Sarah, Adi, Simcha, and Isaac. The stage is now open for you.
Not sure precisely who you meant by that, but thank you. Simcha has asked us to let you know that he sends his apologies that he's not able to join this concluding session. And we thank you all very, very much for both the organizers, the speakers, the chairs, all of the audience, all of the participants. We really welcome this opportunity to have created a forum. It wasn't the in-person forum that we had hoped for, but it has the advantage of allowing people from across the world in different time zones and at a much lower expense to enjoy the opportunity to come together and to share your ideas and to really kind of spark the discussion that we like to encourage. So thank you very much. And I will shortly send the link once again to this Wonder Me informal social gathering that Maria set up for us. And thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.